What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the first-person shooter tutorial series, we are going to be going over actually equipping weapons and items on our backs or other parts of our character. That way they're not just gone when we don't have them selected. So for example, if I go and pick up any item here, and pick up this weapon, I can switch between them. The weapon that you're not seeing right now should technically be part of my body somewhere, and you can see in my shadow that it is now. If I am to get a different weapon, such as this one right here, and switch it, you can see the weapon actually changes. I've only set up my position and rotation properly for the blaster and the shotgun, so this weapon kind of just sticks out. This is something you can configure per item, and I'll show you how to do that. You could also have a different socket for each weapon if you want to attach them at different points. So you have a lot of options, but the main goal for today is just to be able to show this visibly on the player, as opposed to it just disappearing when they're switching weapons. You can see this a few ways. You don't just have to use the shadow. I'll show you another way while we're doing this episode, but as an example, if I don't activate this camera right away, then we won't see it from the regular position that it's at, and so I can kind of look down and you'll be able to see my mesh. And then as I pick up weapons, you can see that this has attached to the character. Also, before we get started, if you want to get caught up in the series, feel free to check out the entire first-person shooter tutorial series right here in the top right corner. That's the whole playlist, and you can see how we've done things from aiming down sights, interacting with the environment, and a lot more. If you're just interested in equipping me weapons to your character mesh, then I'll link you to this episode right here, which is where we actually went over switching weapons, because we're going to use that function to determine the active weapon, and the inactive weapon that we have is what we're going to stow. So we're using that logic and building off of it for today's episode. I'll link that right here in the top right corner if you're interested. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to be doing a little bit in the editor for the skeletal mesh and the sockets, and then we're going to be doing some in the blueprints, and after that we're going to convert some stuff to code to make it more efficient and easier to edit in the future. So we're going to be all over the place today. The first thing I want to do is set up our sockets for where we can stow these weapons. So we need to go to our character's skeleton. For me, that's in Art, Characters, Playable, and it's just this YBot skeletal mesh that I got off of Mixamo. I'm going to open that up. In here, we already had a weapon that we were attaching to a socket as a preview mesh. That way we could see how characters look when they were holding the weapon. Additionally, I've added 2 sockets for stowing weapons today, so I have one weapon on the back, and then I have one weapon on the hip. We're not going to use the hip weapon today because as of the current time, we can only hold 2 items, and we don't have a way to stow both of our weapons, but we will. So I went ahead and set them both up today, but we're only going to be checking and using the one on the back today. Once we're in our skeleton, we can go to the skeleton tree here to see all the bones that make up our skeleton. From here, it's up to you to determine where you want these weapons to be stowed when they're inactive. So again, this is my setup. You choose what you want. For me and for the Mixamo skeleton, if you want to copy this, I have one on the back that comes from the left shoulder bone. When you click on a bone in the skeleton tree here, it will show you where the bone is with a visual representation. And then you can also move the bone, rotate the bone, or scale the bone. I don't want to do any of this on the bone, but I want to make a socket and adjust the location, rotation, and scale from there. So left shoulder happened to be a good spot for me. So I right-clicked on left shoulder and selected Add Socket. When you do this, you'll get this little symbol here, which is a socket, and it will ask you to name it. I called mine Stowed Weapon Socket 1. So at this point, you have this little object here. You can't really see anything on a socket. It's just representing a point in space that links to this bone, so that as these bones move, the socket moves and anything attached to that socket also moves. Now, for testing purposes, you can add preview meshes, very similarly to how we did the weapon mesh that the character is holding in their hand here. So if you right-click on your socket, you can select Add Preview Asset, and it will show you all your different meshes. So for me, I selected my classic blaster mesh that comes with the Unreal Engine template for the first-person shooter. This is built in, it's not from an asset pack or the marketplace or anything like that. And I selected this one. sk_fp gun, and it's preview only because, as it says, attached assets in Persona are preview only and do not carry through to the game. So this isn't actually putting it on the character, it's just showing us what it would look like. Once you get here, your weapon will spawn in. And at this point, this is where you will want to move it, rotate it, or scale it. Now, I'm going to undo all of those because I happen to like where I have it. But this is really entirely up to you. You determine where you want it to be. Now, if I change the mesh, and I can do this by removing all attached assets, and then I can right-click and add another preview asset, and go to AK. I know there's one in here called KA74. It looks like this. I can go ahead and select this weapon. Now, this weapon isn't working on the same socket. That's why you saw those other weapons in the shadow that weren't the blaster didn't actually work on the back. This is because this mesh is just at a different orientation than the blaster was. You have a few different options to solve this. You can either just add another socket to left shoulder, add socket, and then through the game logic, when you're determining the weapon type, you see it's this weapon type, so I have to use this new socket. If it's the blaster, I use the old socket. That might be helpful anyway, because you might have it oriented properly and you still don't like the way it actually looks on the character. And so each weapon may have their own socket location, rotation, and scale to make it look a little bit better. The other option you have is to rotate all the skeletal meshes and move them to be in the proper spot, the same spot in the editor. So for example, I will go ahead and change this out. So I just undid all of that. Now, if I want, I can go to this mesh. So I look for FP gun. At this point, I could come in here and I could take the root bone and I could rotate the mesh. And if you get them all to face the same way, then you'll fix your issue. Alright, so now we're back here. I'm going to show you my other weapon. So I had this one on the hip here. For this one, I went to my right up leg bone on the Mixmo skeleton. It's right here. And I right clicked and added a socket, and the socket I added was called Stowed Weapon Socket 2. And in Stowed Weapon Socket 2, I added a preview mesh, which was my SMG 11, and I oriented it properly with where I wanted it to fit. Eventually we'll do this sort of thing with grenades and equipment as well. But now that we know our character has the right sockets and we can visualize that they're in the spot that we want, we're good to go here. Next place we want to go is in the base character blueprint. So for me, that is in first person, character, base character BP. We want to go to the event graph. And specifically, we actually want to go to the detach current weapon function. So detach current weapon, I can show you where this is called. So if we go to find references, it is called in the event switch weapon. Switch weapon is the event that's called when we're changing between the weapons that we have, or if we picked up a new weapon and we're trying to equip it. What this means is the weapon we currently have was previously being detached, and then we were taking the new weapons, the weapon that's the current weapon, or our weapon index, and finding that in the weapons array, then attaching it to the proper spot with the proper socket. Additionally, and unrelated, I have a duplicate node here from some point that we don't need, so I'm just going to remove it to clean it up a little bit. So we're all good here, but this function right here, detach current weapon, was actually detaching that weapon from our character's mesh. And while we still technically want to do that, we actually want to move what it's attached to. We want to attach it to a different socket on the mesh, not the hands. So if we go into detach current weapon, we were getting our character mesh, getting all children of it, looping through them, and making sure that the children did not contain the name camera. Now, this was a way for us to just find the attached assets and move them. To be honest, this is a little primitive. We could be a lot better with this, but it's fine for the time being. So to avoid confusion, I'll leave it alone for now. As long as it didn't contain camera, or the branch returns false, then we were detaching it from the component. So the target is the array element, and we were detaching it from whatever it was attached to, which we were looping through the children of the character mesh. So the only other thing besides the camera we're attaching to the mesh at the current time is our weapon. We were detaching it from the mesh. At this point, I'm going to remove this node and instead take the result of the for loop, the array element of the for loop, and pass it into the target on a new node called attach component to component, because basically what we're going to do is attach the weapon mesh to our character mesh. So let me clean this up a little bit because I don't need all these reroute nodes here. So we can search for attach component to component. Now we're going to want a scene component, but there's even an easier way to do this. So you can drag off of the array element. Oops. Attach component to component, and you only have one option. So we select this one here. And for the parent, that's what we're attaching this weapon to. We want to attach it to our character's mesh. Well, character mesh is a component that we have on the character, so we can just drag it in, get it here, and set it on the parent. Alternatively, you can simply search for get character mesh and scroll down and get the character mesh right here. Next, we need the socket to attach to. So my first socket was the stowed weapons socket 1 right here. We need to make sure we match that name. Stowed weapon socket 1. And then it's up to you for your location, rotation, and scale rule. I recommend snapping them to target because we set everything up on the socket itself for how we want it to look. So I snap to the orientation of the socket. And then weld simulated bodies is perfectly fine. This is for physics and it won't affect anything right now. And that's what we have right here. So anyway guys, I hope this helps you stow your weapons in your shooter game. If it did, please subscribe. There's a lot more to come with stowing weapons and with the series in general, and if you're interested in catching it, subscribing is the best way to do so. It also helps the channel out a lot, which I really appreciate. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership, Patreon subscribers, and Discord subscribers. You guys are so incredible, and I am so incredibly grateful for you. Thank you for all the love and support. If you're into any issues while following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to help you out, and that support is completely free. That's all I got, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.